Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Ask Sibs. It's Friday. We made it. As I mentioned a couple of times, this week's been a particularly long slug for me. I think a mixture of workload, but also the general kind of end of January, still kind of winter vibes. But the nights are starting to get evenings are getting a bit longer. Last night on the dog walk, it was about 5 o'clock when it was getting dark. So, there are signs that spring is around the corner, and obviously February, when I'm back next Monday, back for the working week, it's the 1st of February. So, lots of reasons to be positive, but for me particularly, that does find the middle of winter quite a strain. I'm looking forward to getting into February and into spring. So today I'm going to be talking about the role that film has in disability education, sort of raising awareness of disability for more societal inclusion. And I'm really happy that this question came from you, the viewers. I had one earlier on that was John Clucas had direct messaged me on LinkedIn, and this came in via my Twitter from Kevin Knight, who works at Ozian, and we've done some work on a conference that I was involved in. Kevin sort of was saying this was a general question from his own interest about the way that film may or may not have a role and an impact in disability inclusion. And as he mentioned when he was sort of explaining the question, there's aspects around, we in the past, sort of film was less distributed. We had to go to a cinema. Indeed, the news was also less distributed. You had to go to the cinema to watch the news. Obviously, I'm talking probably a bit more before I was born in the 80s. But point being that the way media has evolved for news and for TV and film has changed a lot. And then now, when we've got the sort of on-demand internet news and we've got the Netflix, Amazon Prime videos of this world, then films and TV obviously get into our living rooms more. And then also when we look at the way that there wasn't really many / any films that featured a sort of disabled character or a disability theme, and that there's so many different tangents to go on this conversation. It's really, really interesting, actually. But yeah, I think just as a broad trend, we can see that there's been a lot more films in recent years. And Kevin cited a few himself, like The Fundamentals of Caring, Me Before You. I know that there's been a couple like Crip Camp on Netflix I loved. Rising Phoenix was all about the Paralympics. So yeah, there's like a lot more certainly the last 10 years film-wise. And then like how to unpick this. I think that the role is big. To answer the direct question, what role does film have in disability education? It's massive. And I think there's some really cool, as I say, tangents to go off, because I'm sort of thinking that there's the fact that we actually have anything about disability more spoken about, whereas there was a point it was kind of pushed away and segregated and ignored or not even known about. So I think just the fact that it has something about disability is really positive, really important. I definitely cite the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, where that sort of Channel 4 advert of the superheroes and, the sort of idolizing of the Paralympians was really strong and positive and powerful, that there was this narrative of disability that wasn't triumph over tragedy or kind of charity and welfare, but it was you could argue some of it was a bit triumph over tragedy, because the media would still speak to the person's disability as a thing that happened and it's not positive and it's difficult. However, they've triumphed. So it did have some of that vibe, but it was certainly not the welfare charity narrative that had definitely preceded it. And then we all know as disabled people that after a while it got a bit boring, that everyone that wasn't disabled would make jokes about, when are you going to get in the Paralympics? Like every disabled person had to become a Paralympian. And, for anyone that actually knows what it takes to be a Paralympian, it's as bloody difficult as it is to be an Olympian without a disability. And it's not everyone's calling in life to actually be able to give that dedication or have that talent to be a Paralympian. And so I think there had to be a bit of a correction of, okay, at least we're talking about disability, at least we're talking about it in a more positive way. However, maybe what about the disabled people that are teachers and in business and in sport, but grassroots sport. So I think we've still got a fair way to go in that sort of way we talk about disability. I think there's another point about actors. There's a lot in the media, and I know when Kevin mentioned, and I can see Kevin's commented with a few other people. I'll come to the comments very shortly. But yeah, I think one of the films was Me Before You, got some backlash that from the sort of disability rights angle, that maybe it was a little bit of a negative view because the guy wanted to go down the euthanasia route because he hated having become disabled. And so there's a whole sort of debate on when it's acquired disability, whereas I've always had my disability, and I feel quite positive as an identity part that I'm disabled, but not everyone does. So yeah, there's so many, as I said, so many ways to take the discussion. But I know that there were, some backlash on a couple of these stories from parts of the disabled community. But a big backlash now, particularly more recently, is that the actors in films and TV should be actors with a disability playing the roles of disabled people, as opposed to non-disabled people playing roles about disability. And all this gets very, very contentious. It's a very emotive, sort of quite a fiery conversation in different parts of it all. I suppose just to give a little personal opinion, I think that on the one side, acting is about becoming a character and being something different. So I think that there's definitely something positive about that we've got the narrative of disability, but also actually if a non-disabled plays it and they're the best person, that's an angle that I've heard. But actually I think there's so many disabled actors out there that ultimately are good enough, given the nurturing and the opportunity, who can't get other roles. And so actually, excuse me, without it being tokenistic, which I don't ever think tokenism should come into play, that we should be getting opportunities and working more with disabled actors on those kind of roles. And the last point to mention on that sort of vibe of it all, it's really just about the whole representation, which comes back to Purple Coat and advertising and marketing, that we just want to have that representation of disability to be more seen. But alongside that, it needs to sometimes be that a person in a film, and I was chatting to someone at the BBC about this the other day, but happens to have a disability. And what we mean by that is that the actual story is about the person, the journey, the plot, the interactions, the discussions, and having a disability as part of who they are, as opposed to the whole plot of a film is about the fact the person has a disability. And I hope that distinction comes across clearly enough. But it's almost to say, let's have disability involved as a part of society and everyday life. But the person with a disability is the villain or the victim, but it's not just because it's about them being in a wheelchair, or for example, because there's other disabilities. So and then I think the last point I had, which I think Kevin sort of did mention, I'll bring up your point now, Kevin. I remember growing up 80s, 90s too, the only real inclusion of disability on TV through characters on a show called Grange Hill. Yeah, I remember that. And Francesca, I think I said it was Martinez, but Francesca's definitely done a lot since around comedy and raising awareness through stand-up comedy and all this kind of stuff. And she was in Grange Hill. And I was just coming to your point as well, Kevin, when you made that when I talk a lot about influence, then, having Netflix and Crip Camp and Rising Phoenix and other films and TV shows that include disability, it has a big influence on more of the population's sort of interaction with disability. So those sort of some general firing off of summarizing it from my knowledge and giving some thoughts and perspectives. As always, we've got lots of comments, so thank you, and I'll come to the comments in a second. But yeah, like really appreciate everyone getting involved, and would still love to hear your comments, even if you're not watching the live. So Marnie said, also have to sit right at the front of the cinema if you need a wheelchair space, which is never fun. Yeah, there's quite a lot of those front row spaces for wheelchairs. You're really like having to put your head right back to actually see the screen, which is never the most comfortable. So that was back to when we're saying that, it's easier having all the films more streamed to home than only having to go to the cinema. Trish saying good afternoon, hope you're well. Back at you, Trish. And then Marnie saying, have you watched Raising Dion? It's a series rather than a film, but the way disability is in it, it's just amazing, as it's just included. It's not done to be inspirational. Highly recommended, which is exactly what I was just speaking to before, Marnie, about, I think you wrote it, and I got to that point a bit later on in my spiel, but exactly that it's not, the plot isn't about disability, but it includes and covers that topic through one of the characters. I'm pretty sure I have seen it. I'm trying to recollect it because I've seen so much stuff the last year or two, particularly with the lockdown, but it does sound familiar. I also watched a show called Rami, which is on Stars Play, which is a sort of spin-off subscription on Amazon Prime Video, and that's the same thing there. There's a character played by an actor called Steve Way, who is American. I believe I've connected with him a few years back on Facebook, but he randomly popped up in Rami, and there's some quite out there and farcical scenes, and of course it is going to include and cover disability, but it's just a little bit just it's not the focus of the plot or the episode. It's just builds as part of it, which is really cool. Marnie's saying I've crashed on LinkedIn. It still says it's connected, so I don't know why that would be. Anyway, whether that's resurrected itself or not, I don't know. I see that you're on Facebook now, Marnie. Good to have you back with us. Trish, quite agree with you on that. The person should be disabled if they are playing a disabled role. So Trish agreeing with me earlier about that broader point of the sort of inclusion of actors. Marnie saying, I think it's a difficult one because it depends on the full role and storyline. If there are flashbacks to when they're able-bodied, should they get body doubles? Yes, really they should, but I can see how it could be difficult depending on the role. And yeah, if we're talking about someone that becomes disabled, which is I think Me Before You has that, then it's certainly got that added layer, probably not insurmountable with body doubles and with computer graphics or whatever, but equally there's a little bit more around that part of it. But let's have more characters that are deaf and blind, neurodiverse, wheelchair user for life. I'm sounding like now I'm a wheelchair user with Thug Life going down my old hip hop road. But yeah, I think that there's still ways that there should be more coverage of different disabilities, and therefore actors that absolutely can cover that. Sumeda saying it depends how close they are in showcasing the reality and not making it dreamy. I mean, that's an interesting point. We know Hollywood does make films and in general sort of that TV stuff, maybe not just Hollywood, but generally TV and film is a bit dreamy, and that we could probably have a broader criticism of should TV and film be a bit more realistic, but then sometimes it's nice to have the escapism, but also to your point, Sumeda, in terms of about disability, I think reality has to be a part of it, but I'm all for a bit of dreamy aspiration around what the world could look like as an inclusive world. And just generally kind of amazing disabled characters. Why not have them dreamy in the sexually attractive way as well, for instance? But I'm not saying I'm disagreeing with you, Sumeda. I'm just making the point that we need the reality. And maybe there's something about hard-hitting documentaries versus like Disney cartoons and the way that there's a different style as well. So Kevin saying awesome. Thanks, Martin. Big thanks back to you as well for asking the question. It's really nice to be getting some more audience participation on the questions that I'm covering. And it's something I maybe wouldn't have thought about myself to come up with, but it's a very interesting topic. And Trish is saying that is not nice. I think that would have been when we were talking about the lack of opportunities earlier. I hope. But yeah, so I think we're done with all the comments and questions on the live. I covered all the random stuff I wanted to mention from my personal perspective. But as I said, do feel free to comment with your thoughts later on in the day if you're watching this later. Hopefully LinkedIn reconnected. I have to have a look into that for next week. And yeah, have a great Friday afternoon, a lovely weekend. And I'll see you back for a way more rejuvenated, for this is speaking from my side now. Yeah, a nice rest, and I'll be back more rejuvenated on Monday, even more than I have been. All right, take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.